Deva Madhava Prabhu. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Go Prabhupada Prabhu. Glad to be with you.
How are you?
To you. Doing well. It's warming up here in Michigan. The sun is out and it's above 70, so we're happy.
Hare Krishna. So you're a member of the GBC SPT. And of course, what we do is produce things, COVID things, interest on devotional service, devotee care things. I guess the biggest thing that we did was the Chaitanya, Churn, and Retest series, where 74 devotees came together. I'd like to remind devotees that are watching this that they can go onto our website and see all of that wonderful portrayal of Chaitanya, Churn, and Retest. So you came up with an idea. I think it was your idea. Why don't we spend some time portraying second generation people that are accomplishing something in the preaching and devotee care part? So just give us a quick review of this series that you're starting, and you're actually starting it today.
Sure. One of the things we talk about in the group a lot is organizational awareness. And there are actually so many good things going on in ISKCON that many devotees just aren't aware of. And if more devotees were aware of the good things happening, it would kind of take away some of the momentum from that idea that there's not a lot going on, or there's more that should be happening that isn't. There's a lot of wonderful things happening that we're just not aware of. And the idea behind this series, which it was not my idea, but I'm happy to be a part of it. And I was, you could say, the natural person in the group to take it up. The idea behind this series is to help more devotees become more aware of the wonderful things being done by kind of next generation leadership, so to speak, already. There's this recognition, obviously, that the Prabhupada generation, you all are departing from us, and we don't like that, but it's happening. And there must be that taking of the baton. And although there's an urgency that more of it needs to be done, and certainly I would agree, there's also a lot already happening, and a lot of young people taking responsibility in ways that inspire them, ways that they see Prabhupada is demanding of any of his followers. And so I'm looking forward to just featuring those devotees on this series and giving the ISKCON community in general more of a sense of what is happening in the hearts of young people, and that they are taking up the baton, and it's going well.
And we picked you to lead this series because, in fact, you're highly entrepreneurial. How long ago did you join the movement?
I met the devotees in 2010.
Okay.
My entrepreneurial side, I was working with a company through college that sold books door to door. So not Prabhupada's books. Not Prabhupada's books, but
prophetic.
Yeah, secular books, kind of like encyclopedias, for lack of a better term. And through that, I was going door to door in Detroit, Michigan, and I knocked on the door of a devotee, and that, he gave me a book instead.
Wonderful. So, okay, then you joined Krishna Consciousness in full when?
So 2010, I met the devotees, and I was already kind of in an existential place in my life. That was July. I was looking at that point. I wasn't actively trying to sell those books. It was just a kind of pretense I ran away to Detroit, actually. The company that I work with tried to put me in Highland Park, Chicago, which is a very wealthy, affluent suburb. Anyone who's read Radhanath Maharaj's biography, that's where Maharaj grew up, that suburb. And so they'd stationed me there, but I ran away to Detroit because I wanted to be in a kind of like material world war zone where there was a more honest expression of the whole situation as I was seeing it. And so when I met the devotees, I immediately felt this was why my heart had, told me to go to Detroit. And I was reading Science of Self-Realization, and page after page, Prabhupada was just so sequentially answering every question that was coming up from every answer that he'd given previously. And by the end of that book, it was so clear to me that this was everything I'd looked for in my life. So I joined in my heart, so to speak, that summer, July 2010, pretty immediately. But then my material scene, so to speak, wound down to me moving into the ashram in 2011, in Detroit in February 2011.
Mm. And you took initiation from Jayapataka Maharaj?
Jayapataka Maharaj, yeah, that next year in 2012, in Angkor in Mayapur, a godbrother. A godbrother was going to get some surgery just to be out of work for 2 months. He was going to get knee surgery just to be able to kind of play hooky from work. And I told him, why waste your time like laying in bed? Why not just go to the Dham? And he liked that idea. And so he appreciated me for telling him to do that. So he took me with him. And that's how I got to go to Mayapur for the first time and got initiated there in 2012, Gaur Purnim. And then that summer, or rather that fall, is when I moved out of the Detroit temple and began where I'm serving now, over in the Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor area, which is a college area about 45 minutes west of Detroit.
So go ahead and tell us how you developed your project. You basically developed it from nothing, yeah?
Yes and no. I tried to steer away from that romanticized version of what I've done, because one of the challenges I see with the movement is this kind of like idea to revert back to the old days and to make everything, it's successful if it looks like the old days. And so in the old days, it really was something from nothing. And it was devotees going out into places that had never heard, seen, felt Krishna in any way. And I didn't have to do that. I went to a place, I was coming from an established devotee community, Detroit. Prabhupada was there, Fisher Mansion. Hopefully many of the people watching know that history. But then I went to a place where many devotees had preached before, Badri Narayan Maharaj. So many devotees, there had been several centers through the years. 2000, I think, was the last time Ann Arbor had a kind of formal preaching center. And so some of the devotees in Detroit, Sri Nandanandana Prabhu, specifically your godbrother, the famous author, Stephen Knapp, he suggested you should go there and try to do something. And so I started doing a little like prasadam catering, and then we do book distribution and Harinam. And another devotee, Uma, who was already established in the movement, initiated, and she was attending school there. And she started a Bhakti Yoga Society at the same time that I'd started to go there regularly. And so we gained a little momentum, and I met one young man named Siddhari, who's now full-time devotee, very fixed and doing wonderful service, still with our community. But I met a young, at the time, his name was Siddharth, and I realized he was paying $1,700 a month to stay in an apartment in Ann Arbor. It was a very high-end kind of town, expensive place to be. But he was doing his PhD, and he was getting paid by his department. So we realized we could take that same money that he's, giving to his landlord and just use it to get a little center off campus. We would just need maybe one other person to rent. And so we were able to find someone who's now a disciple of Vaisheshika Prabhu, Yashoda Nandana, I believe his name is. He was also a student at the time and had some connection with ISKCON. So he began renting a room from us. Siddhari also rented, and then I was kind of the ashram manager, the full-time devotee running the whole thing. So that was in Ann Arbor. We had our little Krishna house, we called it. And then we realized there's the town next over, which also has a university, but more of a low-key, like local school rather than the high-profile Ivy League vibe that Ann Arbor is. Eastern Michigan University, it's called. We realized that town, Ypsilanti, you could get twice the house for half the money. And so that's what we did. We moved and started renting in Ypsilanti, where we had a 7-bedroom house. And that's where I learned the lesson of quantity is not quality. we filled the ashram with 13, 14 people of all different natures and types and ages and stratifications, many of whom are still in Krishna consciousness. Some people who joined there still in Krishna consciousness, but I kind of started to learn my lessons around community building in that space. And then one devotee named Prem Vilas, who's the Columbus Temple president, he said, "Why are you wasting Krishna's money renting? Why don't you buy a place?" And to me, a poor boy from North Carolina, I didn't have that frame of what to do with money and that it's available if you want it and have the initiative. That wasn't quite on my radar, but this devotee pushed me to try to buy a place and start paying a mortgage instead of rent. And so we realized, in Ypsilanti, it's rather affordable. And in 2014, we mortgaged our first property, 108 North Adams Street. And that's
108, huh?
Yeah, that's its own little story. It was 106, And then we called I was Google mapping, as any good millennial does when they buy a property. I was looking at Google Maps of our property and the satellite view, just to see if there's any interesting things that happened before we purchased it. And we noticed that on Google Maps, the property was 108 in our driveway. Our driveway was essentially zoned as 108. And so when I was calling the city for some zoning to make sure that we would be able to do what we wanted to do, we found out that the property was zoned 106 and 108. And so I asked the lady, hey, by the way, could we have 108 as the address? And she said, oh, sure. And she, clicked one button and our address became 108. So that was the kind of cherry on top that we'd found the right property. And that was 2014 that we got that center. So that became what's known now as the Harmony Collective. That's kind of our branding. And we've started a restaurant 2 blocks away from that center. And we have a farm exactly a half hour south of us in a little town called Maybe, Michigan.
So with all of this, you now have a farm, a center, and a restaurant, and you've got a community going. Give credit to everybody that credit is due. But then we give credit to you.
Right, Krishna. Yeah, when I first began reading Srila Prabhupada's books, he has, it just takes one competent man to run a center. And that kind of stuck in my heart when I was living there in Detroit. I was feeling, I'm a competent man. So the last 7 years or so have been me learning how incompetent I am, but still, because there's that desire there, Prabhupada has, and the devotee community has helped us develop something along the lines of the wholesome experience that Prabhupada wanted, I think, everyone to feel and see in Krishna consciousness. The farm was our most recent kind of acquisition. And we realized that it's very hard today, young people, to present Krishna consciousness and not have an environmental element to demonstrate to them. It's one thing to speak about it. And 50 years ago, when Prabhupada was coming and speaking to the baby boomer generation who were, high off their parents' wealth that came off of America winning World War II and the rest of the developed world being bombed to the ground, the radical statement of "you are not your body" and "this world is suffering," that really hit hard for people 50 years ago. But 50 years forward, everyone knows that this world sucks and it's not a very fun place to be. It's not a very radical thing to say, actually. Really, we need to be doing what we're preaching. And I think most devotees are aware of that, but we ourselves felt it's very difficult to do outreach without that element. So that was the kind of final piece in terms of fleshing out the material side of our outreach. And even for ourselves, our community support. It's such a nice thing to have cows to take care of.
So you have cows, you're growing things on the farm?
Yeah, we've got 1.25 acres that we're growing. And the first year, a young man named Dylan, we started our ashram. This kind of gets into how my shift changed from what's needed to what's actually needed. When we first began the center, we just thought it was a place to do outreach for local people. It's not a temple. It's a nice house, and we'll have a couch for them to sit on and that kind of thing. But very quickly, what happened was many established devotees, people who were already connected to the movement, felt called to come and be a part of the community. And I found myself most of my time taking care of them and helping them develop. And we didn't have so many, a mass of new people, so to speak. It'd be a trickle, 1 or 2 a year would join, and it's wonderful. But most of my time and effort has gone into helping established devotees really take root in the movement and feel like they have something to contribute long term, feel safe in their service, so to speak. And so our ashram shifted also. We stopped trying to bring in new bhaktas, so to speak, because it's very hard to gain the critical mass necessary to have a nice bhakta program. You need 5 or 6 new guys at one time. And I've never been able to aggregate that. But I realized that if we kind of set a program for the Forgotten Ashram, so to speak, the young guys that have established themselves in their sadhana, but now they need to figure out, all right, what's a lifetime in the movement look like?
So what's my service? What's my contribution?
Exactly. And what's my psychophysical setup that I need to be able to sustain that, not just for 6 months, the shooting stars that we've all seen in and out, but really a sustained burn of offering into the fire of the movement. And so we started what we call our next generation ashram, Launchpad Ashram, where young people who are established, either born in the movement or they've been around 3-4 years, they can come and take on some scope of service that personally inspires them. We're fortunate we don't have deities to take care of and a big overhead of a large temple space. We don't have to be so forceful in what people need to contribute to when they come. So as long as they keep a clean space and, come to the Harinam and go to the Sunday brunch, then, cook something once in a while, then we have the kind of luxury to let them do what they're inspired to do otherwise. And so we brought a young man in named Dylan a year ago on that program, and his idea was to do gardening. And that's just when we had the farm. And so we said, okay, we'll give you a little bit of resource. We bought him a greenhouse and a few other tools. And he really executed flawlessly. All credit to Dylan. And he attracted some funding. So now that greenhouse has been turned into basically a year-round aeroponics growing station that's going to be able to churn out around $30,000 worth of produce a year from aeroponics and hydroponics, kind of a combined hybrid system, and then a microgreen system. So it looks like the garden of the 23rd century in there, but it's pretty cool. And it was a really edifying thing to see a young man. He's not even initiated yet, but because he has a responsible kind of track record of service and he had this desire, we took a gamble, and it really paid off tremendously. So that's our garden side. And then on the cow side, when we purchased the property, it had 3 cows. And my plan was to have 6 cows come over about 2 to 3 years, but Krishna had other plans. So we had 7 cows in the next 6 months. And we've had those 7 cows since, and we're kind of locking it in there. We don't even call the place a farm. We call it an eco model, to try to steer away from the expectation that comes with that language of farm, especially in our own movement, farm community and the self-sufficiency. We're not trying to save the world. We just want to give an example to ourselves and others of what's possible in a more natural environment. And it's going well so far. We're modeling that for ourselves and those that we're reaching out to.
You have a little cough.
Yeah, I'm coming off of COVID, so it's.
I didn't want to mention it, but I think maybe our audience should know.
Yeah, it's okay. I welcome any prayers.
And thank God it was a light. I think it was pretty light for you, wasn't it?
Definitely, yeah. I feel very fortunate.
This COVID thing is nasty.
Yeah.
So okay, who is Srila Prabhupada to you?
I appreciate that question, and my own answer is one that I actually hesitate to give because it's like a word that I don't. The first word that really comes to mind is that Srila Prabhupada is my savior. At the same time, I don't like the Christianity vibes that can come into any religious movement. And speaking about Christianity in terms of the kind of over-dependence, the sycophantic view of the Acharya that has developed in that religious community. When I think of Srila Prabhupada as my savior, I see someone that has proven it's possible to live a pure and perfect life, even in this very ugly place that we're in now. And anytime I feel myself getting into a mood of lethargy or apathy, et cetera, all the emotions that come in with being a conditioned soul, I first, before anyone else in my life, feel Prabhupada's example yanking me out, just demanding that I come out of that. I'm not allowed to stew in that experience because he didn't. And he gave up, Florida for Americans is like the pinnacle of retirement, right? You lived a long, hard life and now you get to go to Florida. Prabhupada left the Florida of sadhus. He left Vrindavan and came here to America, which to him was going to be a place where he didn't know if he'd have anything to eat aside from potatoes. And yet he did that for me. And when I remember that, I'm not allowed to stew in my own, apathy and lethargy and conditioning for very long. So he saved me in that way. And for that reason, I think Lilamrita was still the most profound book that I've read in the movement. When I read Lilamrita, that's when my own idea about what I wanted to contribute and how I wanted to go about it, that's when it really carterized the idea of having a community, having a center. Budding, I was still naive about what that meant, but the need for that really sunk in reading Lilamrita and just seeing Prabhupada's heroic effort, not just the kind of like Hollywood version of sitting under a tree and pair of kartals and the movements suddenly started, but really the lifetime of effort that Prabhupada gave, and how if I can somehow also figure out how to stick around for a lifetime offering some effort, then I can expect similar kindness from Krishna.
That's really a wonderful vision of Srila Prabhupada. I really appreciate that. Now, when you started early, before you went there, started a center, you had all the options of the world to do. Why did you pick that instead of some other service?
Yeah, I appreciate. It's it's funny. I can't answer it totally, because it is something along the lines of mystical. When I first joined, I was first around. I hadn't moved into the temple yet, but this traveling book distributor showed up, and he had been summoned by a senior devotee in Detroit who thought, this kid just came off of selling books door to door. He's got no family, friends, job. He's practically homeless here in Detroit. He's like, a floating element. He's perfect for the Sankirtan van. And one young man, a devotee came, and I won't mention his name because he's a contentious person. Oh, there's my good wife bringing some water. Thank you, Davey. He tried to convince me to get in the van, and it had just been Balaram Jayanti, and the devotees had told me this is Krishna's brother, and he's the representation of Guru, and so you pray to him for some service. So like 2 days later, this Sankirtan devotee shows up and says, the best service is in here, come along. And it was a really tough moment for me, because it seemed like, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm like bred for this. I've just trained for 5 years how to sell, $1,000 sets of books to people, Bhagavad Gita's on the streets. That should be easy. And yet I felt in my heart that there was something I owed this place, Detroit. Like, this was home now. And these people had saved me, and I have to offer that back. And so that's what stuck me in Detroit. And I said no to that opportunity. And then when the opportunity came to go to Ann Arbor, it was another tough moment that I want, Detroit has so much potential, and that's a whole talk, but I won't go that angle right now. There's so much potential there. And yet my seniors were encouraging me to go to Ann Arbor. There were some mystical elements that occurred, and some sweet people that were coming up that were angling towards that road. And so I just followed those indications from Krishna and Guru and the sadhus, and everything has developed from there. And I haven't, all my desires for other services and being in other places, something else I was able to be a part of was the New York City Harinam Ashram. The kind of, when Ram Roy Prabhu, who's, most devotees know now about that heroic effort, 6 hours a day, Harinam, going, aside from the COVID moments, every day in New York City for the last 9, almost 10 years now. I got in on the ground floor of that, so to speak, and was around for the first 4 or 5 years of that being established. And I was able to go back and forth doing both services. And so I found that the more I hold on to my roots here in the Detroit and Ypsilanti area, all my other desires for other services and possibilities have fructified and sprouted, even in the services working with the GBC SPT and having more connections to the global ISKCON community. That's happened because of my rooting, my anchoring here in Ypsilanti. And so that's something I would really encourage devotees in general to do and to recognize, is that if we function more like trees, where we just stick in one spot and let our roots go deep, then our branches can go out in profound ways and provide lots of shade and shelter and fruit to others. But if we act like these tumbleweeds, that's kind of been the archetype of our movement, the traveling sadhu, and every time the wind blows hard, you go a different place. That's really eroded the fabric of our communities over the years. And it's been my opposite experience that from staying put, I've developed so many deep connections, not only locally, but also to the larger ISKCON community.
So you're starting this series of portraying significant projects, some of them startups, some of them moving forward. The basic idea is devotional service is an unlimited field, and we should all do something. Okay. And so when you see, okay, we talk about the Prabhupada disciple group. Frankly, they've already more or less dissipated. There's not a whole lot of them left.
Well, you're still in the flesh in front of me, Prabhu. So
yeah, well, the next generation is already actively managing the movement.
Yes.
So what advice do you have for them? What's your advice for these people?
For the next generation?
Yeah.
Well, I would, sorry, city life. A framing comes to mind for myself, because we're in Detroit, and Detroit is famous. You know, our Ambarish Prabhu and his Ford family wealth came from this brilliant invention of the assembly line. And if we think about a car on the assembly line, there's many different things that have to go into it. And if I'm a part of that, where am I on the assembly line, seeing that at the end there's going to be a car, but I might be in the place where I just have to put like a rivet into a frame, which is not even recognizable as a car. It's just this kind of rectangular oblong thing right now, far away from the shiny, you know, kind of sexy thing that's going to roll off the assembly line and out onto the showroom floor. When I see our own movement, Mahaprabhu's movement, as something of a foregone conclusion, as Krishna says to Arjuna, it's this battle's done already. It's already happened. It's just a question of whether you're going to be a part of it. I like to see Mahaprabhu's movement in a similar context because it humbles me in my service. I'm not needed here, but I do have the chance to put a rivet into the car, so to speak. And so to first recognize my place on the assembly line. I may like to put the steering wheel on because that's like a cool thing to do at the end. But if there's not even a steering column yet, then I can't put the steering wheel on. And so our next generation has the task of, when I think about my own service, the task of navigating how to honor the sacrifice, the yajna of your generation, Prabhupada's disciples, in such a way that you don't feel slighted or negated or like undermined by the needed efforts to develop more infrastructure, more social cohesion than was possible in those early days. And that's what I see as the unique kind of moment of our generation. The next 10 years will determine whether or not ISKCON goes through another kind of 50 years of adolescent awkwardness, or if we really come into mature young adults in the next 50 years. That's going to be determined in this sandhya, this window of 10 years, with the next generation moving in, by force of time, ultimately, from the previous generation's service.
So is some of this, does some of what you're saying have this not argument, but this awareness of fundamental principles versus details?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, Prabhupada is the paragon, showing by example what are the fundamental principles, and then the potency of those disciples of his in the early days that took those principles up and demonstrated how powerful they are even in this ugly material world, even themselves coming from ugly material backgrounds, how profound it is when you recognize the principle. But there's a danger also in the kind of romanticizing of the past. Then we miss out on how that principle works today, how it looks today. So for instance, I see this kind of the idealized Sankirtan devotee as someone who goes out on, with a rolly bag of Bhagavad Gitas, standing on a street corner, canvassing to strangers. And that's profound, and it's a wonderful service, and hopefully we've all done it, and we all feel the joy in that. But why does a person who's sitting in a boardroom somewhere in Singapore or America feel any less of a devotee if they're canvassing the people in that boardroom to take up principles of Krishna consciousness, to apply themselves in that atmosphere to create a Brahminical influence, recognizing that even a slight Brahminical influence in an atmosphere like that trickles down and can have profound effects on the atmosphere of the world and ultimately the atmosphere of Krishna consciousness available to people. I feel like that tension there hasn't been navigated as well as it can be. The romanticizing of the past has prevented devotees in powerful positions today from feeling empowered in those positions. And so that principle has to be better felt.
And using similar words as you said, let us not take away from the beauty and the glory and the sacrifice of grabbing a book bag and going out onto the street corner, but why aren't we more going to the keyboard when it's time to preach?
Yeah,
we've seen some good examples of it, but we all know that the whole world works like that. But why are we not going to the keyboard to do our spreading of Krishna consciousness?
Absolutely. And
so I think the details have to change. If they don't change, we're gonna fail, or just really be relegated into being a very, very small organization, which technically speaking we are today. That the principles the principles have to be maintained.
Yes.
But the details must change. It's like, it seems like some of the Prabhupada disciples feel, well, the details could change. Let's stay on the principles. Instead, it seems like let's stay on the principles, but we have to change the details. Yes?
Definitely. And unfortunately, sometimes in that fear of losing track, so to speak, there's a tendency to make principle or details principles. Kind of, again, taking that idea of being on the street corner with a rolly book bag as the highest service. That this is an analogy I like to use in reference to this whole situation at World War II and the storming of the beach at Normandy, when the Allied forces were, coming into the beaches of France to finally get some beachhead, some literal turf to be able to defend, because the Axis powers had taken over literally the continent of Europe. And so you have nothing left to defend in one sense. And so the storming of the beach at Normandy was this dramatic scene. Many of us have probably seen it in movies like Saving Private Ryan, where literally just the soldiers, anyone, sergeant, lieutenant, private, just running straight on with their bayonet, Haribol Bhaktas, everybody charge. And if you survive, then great. And if you don't, then you died for a wonderful cause. But then once that beachhead is established, now there's so many more strategic elements and developments that have to happen for the war to be won. And to continue to storm the beach at Normandy and to think that that's what we have to do all the way till, we push them back to Berlin, it's not going to work. And it's not going to be something that everyone can get behind. So similarly, this kind of like early days refugee consciousness of everybody being in a fraught condition and having to, push with their bayonet out. And that's, if you're not doing that, then you're not doing the highest thing, is actually preventing so many talented, capable devotees from doing what's natural and possible for them now because of the sacrifice of those early devotees. And so it's a bitter irony that in the name of honoring the sacrifice of those in the early days, we're actually undermining what they've given the next generation in being able to implement more of those strategic, nuanced things that could be happening today, but aren't as much because of that idealization of the old times.
Right, these are very valuable points. And then related, how old are you? 34 or 5?
33, yeah. 34 in a few months.
33. And by the way, the majority of businesses started by entrepreneurs is 33 years old. Maybe it's changed a little bit, 34, 35 years old. Okay. The devotional opportunities are unlimited. I think that's something that everybody has to get square in their head, right?
Yeah.
There's just so much opportunity to do service,
Yeah,
that it's unbelievable.
absolutely.
So that's part of your message to your colleagues, your generation?
Yeah, we changed our name from Krishna House to Harmony Collective for basically this reason. One, externally, when we were out, we'd be doing Harinam in Ann Arbor, and we're chanting Hare Krishna, and people would be coming up and they'd be happy to talk to us. But as soon as we invite them to Krishna House, there was like a twinge in their side. It's like somehow it's a little too sectarian for them to come to Krishna's house. But this framing of Harmony Collective, harmony is the principle that's actually being brought out in Mahaprabhu's movement in its most profound degree. No longer caste, no longer creed, no longer the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas. We're all just in this soup of Kali Yuga, and everybody has a chance. All you have to do is accept the value of serving Krishna. That's your qualification. Then humble yourself in front of the sadhus and bring what you have to the table. Actually, your interview with during that Chaitanya Charitamrita series, one of my favorite interviews was with Bhakti Vigyan Maharaj. And he spoke about the three people who don't get Mahaprabhu's mercy, referencing Jiva Goswami. And two of them relevant for this are the Bala, Kapitas, and the Dhana Kapitas. The people who have some strength, Bala, and have some wealth, Dhana, but they cheat the movement by not bringing it to the table. So to be able to bring something to the table, you have to know you have it in the first place. So at the Harmony Collective, internally, we create this ethic, it's not us creating it, it's just reinforcing it, because it's the ethic of the parampara, that you recognize what your talents and aptitudes are, and then you become responsible to those. You bring that to the table. And you have that faith and trust that in this community, others are going to carry what you lack and preserve what you have as we work together. So harmony implies that there's a difference and a sameness, simultaneously one and different. If it's homogeny collective, if we're all, Sankirtan devotees going out 9-10 hours a day, rolly book bags, it's effective. You have the Marines, you have the Navy SEALs, but the society necessarily has to be diverse, necessarily has to support different aptitudes and interests. And so this word harmony captures that. And I feel like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, this is why he called his magazine The Harmonist, is because what we really learn to do in Krishna consciousness is bring together two things that seem like they might be opposed to one another and reconcile them, not only to just create peace, but actually a profound connection to divinity, to Krishna.
So, okay. What kind of devotees will you be interviewing in your series?
I'm looking at some friends and some people that I've heard of. One of my favorite parts of this service with the SPT is, again, creating organizational awareness. And I like to create awareness around things that I'm aware of that I think other devotees should be also. So I have some friends doing some wonderful things. We were just mentioning there's two devotees who've, because they wanted their children to have a wonderful Krishna conscious educational experience, they've created that for their children and 20 other children. And there's a beautiful community building up around them. So I want to bring those devotees on. A friend and godbrother, Kish of the Mayapuris, Kishore, who many devotees I'm sure know. Many devotees probably don't know that he's also very passionate about helping young people who are born in the movement have the same experiences he had growing up. And so he's taken on with a few other of his friends, having a bus tour of sorts every summer. And that's a logistical nightmare. It's like parents calling you all the time, and you have to figure out 30 places to sleep and 70 places to eat, and how to keep it fun, but also keep it Krishna, conscious and stimulating. And I watched I watched he and his wife and a few other devotees doing that a few summers ago, not last summer, of course, but the summer before. And I was profoundly inspired to see, here's a kind of celebrity of the movement, but he's also doing this like in the trenches work, taking care of these little guys and giving them the same wholesome experience he had that was given to him. So he's somebody I want to bring on to share and highlight that work he's doing. And then some devotees who I've only heard of from others saying, I love what this person's doing and it's really working and it's working for me. And this will be my excuse to get to meet them for the first time.
Great. How often will you be doing these?
So the idea will be once a week.
Okay.
And to draw it out and kind of hopefully make it something regular that I can myself sustain. And there's really no dearth of young people doing things in the movement. But to some degree, as we mentioned at the beginning, there's a lack of awareness of that. And the more we can shift that conversation to highlighting what is happening, the more it gives other young people thinking about doing something, it gives them permission. I've had many young people come and tell me that they're doing what they're doing because they saw I was doing it. You're allowed. You don't have to have, kind of a decree from on.
And now look, if you could just, as part of this effort, drive home the point that they don't need permission.
Yeah. To put it bluntly, I'll let you say it that way. But there doesn't have to be this like decree, that the GBC has mandated that you now go out and do this. Prabhupada has mandated for all of us so many things to do. If you have an easy time falling asleep at night, then it's either because you don't have a deep sense of service, or you do and you've given yourself to that service that day. But I have trouble sleeping at night because I'm a little lazy, but I do have a lot of sense of what needs to happen. And there's lifetimes of service to do. And I'm grateful to have that sense of doing it. And the young people today, again, part of the stagnation that we might recognize to some degree in the movement, and that those cultural things we've already discussed, part of breaking out of that is just the young people taking it, just making it happen, recognizing it's there. I can do it. I'm 30 now. I'm 35. I'm not a youth anymore. This like weird idea that even 25 is youth. It's this very like backwards.
Yeah. When will you stop being a youth?
Yeah. At one point.
When will you stop being young?
We have 40-year-olds that allow themselves to be referred to as youth. It's cringy to use a modern parlance. Really cringy. What person walking on the street would ever let you call them a youth at 40, even 30, even 22, right? So in our own movement, yes, the older generation has its own issues around passing the baton, and we'll let you guys talk about that on another show. But our generation could help a lot just by taking it and showing.
And we do have to, something, we do have to talk about that.
Yeah.
It would be a valued thing to be talking about, because I think we would find that my generation, their fears are fairly simple.
Yeah.
Fairly simple.
Some of them are.
We want 16 rounds a day, and we want, following principles, and we want deeply reading Srila Prabhupada's books and developing strong association. These are really the main issues. And then from there, it's kind of like, hey, in other words, set the boundaries and then have full freedom within those boundaries. Yeah,
and the irony is most of the young people I know are not opposed to any of the things you just said. There's like no question for them, because that's what Prabhupada was. That's his mercy also. He was so urgent and so clear, sometimes severely clear, right, to a harmful point in the immediate of the movement. But for the long term, it's so generous of him to be so severely clear on certain things, most of the things you just mentioned, that now the rest of us have the opportunity to be patient in our approach, much more so than he was, because we have this clarity that Srila Prabhupada has offered us. And so we can be patient with people in our preaching now, in our outreach, and in our community development. As long as somebody doesn't say that 4 rounds is enough, if they're only chanting 4 rounds, that's great. And we can celebrate that and encourage that, as long as it doesn't become, well, 4 rounds is all I need to do to be a completely committed, established member of ISKCON. As long as that doesn't fall the relativization of the standard, we have the opportunity, because of Prabhupada's urgency, to be much more patient with such a person than oftentimes we are.
Mm-hmm. We're getting near the end of our time. You have a few closing wrap up kind of comments?
A story was coming to mind, so I'll just share that. Stories are fun. People like them. This was a realization I had, and it speaks to something of the dynamic you're just mentioning. Something that happens for young people in the movement today is that they get this syndrome of kind of walking on eggshells, and we don't eat eggs, but still you can appreciate that walking on eggshells around seniors and what I can and cannot do. Even if I'm an established, initiated devotee following, there's still this reticence about really bringing myself to the movement. And I noticed, so some years ago, this Narendra Modi, Indian Prime Minister, was coming to America. And one devotee who I know who has a relationship with him was trying to help facilitate his visit. And he wanted to give a talk at Harvard University. And I happen to have a very close friend from school who, she's brilliant and well established, and she's got her law degree and MBA. She's like high flyer, and Gates Millennium Foundation, et cetera, et cetera. And I knew that she would be able to establish this contact for Modi's people in Harvard and get, a very high profile thing. And she did, just because I called her up and asked. And it made that whole experience, it wasn't really for ISKCON that I was establishing this, connection and this facility and this opportunity. It was for, a mundane politician. But because this devotee had asked me to, was brainstorming with me how to do this. And of course, Modi has his favorability to our movement. So it's something nice to do for somebody who's a friend of Krishna, so to speak. But I realized that I actually have so many connections from my past life, so many relationships that could actually bring so much benefit to the movement, and people who would be happy to contribute something to a nice organization doing something nice for the world, meditation and yoga and vegetarian and farm communities, etc. But in my own heart, there's a lot of hesitancy, not because Krishna consciousness isn't great, but I'm not sure the experience that those people are going to have interacting with the people that I connect them with. I'm not sure who's, going to come out of left field with some very, harsh and not so nice idea of what that person's doing and how they should do it differently. And so I'm actually guarded in my own involvement in the movement for not allowing my whole life to be connected and all the people in it to just be loud and proud, bold about it. Yeah, here I am. And you can be here too, to some degree. And it made me stop and pause. How many of my friends in the movement, how many young people have similar connections and avenues of resource and relationship that in their heart, they're just not ready to offer to the movement? Whereas in the early days, you hear about whole swaths of people joining, right? Whole communes, whole friend groups, etc., joining, because there was this like openness and loud, proud ethic of sharing Krishna consciousness with everyone you connected to. And so my request for the young people watching is to kind of examine your own heart and see, where are you holding back because of your own apprehensions about the movement? Where are you not preaching and not sharing because of your worry about what people might perceive in their involvement? And then just get rid of that. Just let that go. Put it aside and be bold for Mahaprabhu anyway. Trust that if you're being a responsible devotee, that example will shine brighter than whatever, other attitudes the person.
This is a fantastic ending message. I'd like to end with it, except I'd like to just have if you would permit, a small addendum to what you just said.
Yeah.
And let us work tirelessly to create a movement that we can all be proud of.
Yeah, amen. Exactly. Yeah, that would be the net result of that.
Yeah.
More people recognizing it's cool to be a Hare Krishna again. It's something to be proud of. I'm a part of an organization that is has its challenges naturally, but is facing them in a progressive, responsible way. The beauty of the ethic of Gen Z and millennials, they don't care what you do as long as you're straight up about it. And so that's the irony of it when you have the baby boomer generation, and that ethic is kind of like, go along, get along, keep calm and carry on, the British poster from World War II. Just pretend that it's all okay, and maybe they won't notice that it isn't. Whereas Gen Z is like, be open, because nothing's okay, because we're all damaged goods and we're all harassed by our traumas constantly and make so many horrible choices, and it doesn't matter. We still deserve love. And as long as somebody's transparent about it, it's okay. And so for the larger organization and maybe your generation that's watching, what I would like to say is learn that ethic of transparency. Our little saying here at Harmony Collective, chant and be honest. Happiness comes as a byproduct of honesty. If you're open, then the sadhus can come in, the shastra can come in, the name can come in and heal you. But if you're closed off and you've got this pretentious idea of who you are and who you want others to think you are, then the real salve can't penetrate. So chant and be honest. And if as an organization, ISKCON, we can be honest about our shortcomings and our previous failings, that is actually the most profound way to move us forward in the eyes of the generation of young people today, because that is their ethic. And ironically, it's the ethic of Kali Yuga. It's the only leg of religion we have left, honesty. So if as an organization, we can model that transparency and not pretend to be perfect. We have a perfect philosophy, but we're applying it imperfectly. If we're able to admit that, that gives many young people who could connect to the movement the sign they need to trust us.
Beautiful, Prabhu.
Go around.
Thank you so very much.
I appreciate your valuable time, Prabhu. Speaking of entrepreneurs, you're a spiritual and material entrepreneur. Great success on all sides. So I appreciate you taking the time to let me share these things and have the conversation.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Bol.
Prabhupada. Hari Hari. Thank you, dear devotees. And as usual, please follow our SPT page. Not myself, but many other wonderful devotees will be coming on soon. And we look forward to you being a part of that. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.